There we go. Thanks very much, Andrew. Yeah, sorry everyone. Andrew thinks I'm going to excite you with data. I wish that were true. It's a very tall order, but what I will at least do is try to walk you through some of the considerations that led us to actually start the open data sets for AI project. So if anyone's not aware of the GMG and all the work that the GMG does, this is where the AI working group sits within everything else. So you see there's an awful lot of activities going on within the GMG. But a couple of years ago, the artificial intelligence was identified as something that was important to start looking at in the mining industry. And when you look at some of the other working groups that are here, it's pretty representative of a lot of the important things that are happening in the mining industry. And you just notice just how much AI is kind of pervasive and how much is coming into a lot of these other parts of the industry. Underground mining, the electric mine, autonomous mining, asset management. These are all things that really AI is managing to gain better, allow us to do more with. And even the things that, for example, interoperability and data access and usage, they're just so important as well with AI. So it's a thing that's kind of seeping into everything now that we're kind of doing. And so there's a lot of important things that are coming out of this. And this project is specifically about open data. So if we look at data, we've seen millions of these, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It just goes exponentially. I think I've seen 1,000 million different ones of these, and they all say there's going to be 1,000 million different zettabytes or something. But what it does say is we've got so much data out there, we've got so much data that we don't know what to do with it. So we need to start using it an awful lot, a lot better. So let's start off with a definition, and this one's from the Open Knowledge Foundation. Open data and content can be freely used, modified, and shared by anyone for any purpose. There is no restriction on that at all. And this scares a lot of people. It is free. Once it goes out to the wild, you don't really have much control over it. One of the things that's subtle in this definition is that it doesn't actually say anything about external data. So one other consideration is internally within your organization. Do you have open data? Do you have silos? Can one department see another department's information? And any considerations that you have internal to your organization, really you have to consider externally as well. So I don't have any ability to look at any of the financial information within my own organization. So I don't know what my boss is making, but I'm pretty sure he's making an absolute fortune. I can see the glass of wine he's drinking at the moment. It looks expensive. But you don't get that internally. So why should you get it externally? So I think there's a lot of things we can learn about open data in the external content by just looking at how we look at data internally. And really, if we're not open in our own organization, then we're going to struggle if we're going to be looking at data externally. Yep, so open data. Open data has been pushed very much by governments. And so government has got a lot to gain out of opening as much data as possible. It doesn't really have any commercial considerations. If it opens up some data and a company builds on it and becomes multi-million-dollar company, then that's good for the government as well. So it's got a lot of benefit out of opening data. But open is not the only. It's not the only kid in town. There are other license types that you can look at. So a very popular one is open for non-commercial use, and that's typically something for academics, educational usage. You might have something that is subscription or membership based. So you've got to join. Maybe there's some rules to it. Maybe there's fees. It's not popular, but that it is out there. And then I think the other one is the one that we're all kind of used to, and that's the closed NDA You've got to sign away your first child before you get to look at this data, and you can only use it for a particular project. So that there are other considerations in data, and it's not just totally open. I know you're not supposed to start with the downsides. You're always supposed to start with benefits, but I think it's easier because people always seem to see the issues with this. Why can't we do it? And so the Sunlight Foundation, which is an open data organization, they queried their members and they asked this question, why aren't we doing it? What do you see are the problems? And so to kind of put it into a few buckets, these were kind of the areas that they were having problems with. And the first one really is, why bother? To put it bluntly, why should I bother? What's it in it for me? Mining companies are businesses, just like any other business. If there's not a benefit, then why should we do it? And I think that's probably one of the biggest hurdles to get over. And then there's I'm not really sure what to do. Maybe I can see the benefit out of this, but how do we do it? What do we do? What data do we have? Where is it? Who looks after it? Can I get it out? Who knows about that? Anyone know about it? Do we have the skill sets? So there's a lot of questions on how to do that. What's the process of doing that within an organization? And this kind of feeds back into it's just too hard, let's not bother doing it. And that really is, that there's a lot of that. There's the effort and the cost. Even if you know what to do, somebody who's doing some other job has to stop that job and get this data. And a good data set is a curated data set, and it does have effort involved in it. Then there is the legal aspect of it. So we could sit down and we could convince our mining manager, we could convince the CTO, the CEO, the COO, the CEO, and everyone's nodding their heads going, that's a great idea, yep, go for it. And then someone in the room says, anyone pass this by legal? And of course everyone just, their heads goes down. It's like, oh no, it's legal. Legal's first answer is no. And I guess there's a reason for that, because they're the final gatekeepers. They're looking to protect the organization. And there's things that people might not have thought of that legal will think of. They think of everything. Do we actually own this data? You might be a JV, so maybe you don't actually own it. Maybe it's a joint ownership. Maybe there's other things you need to think about. What's going to be the effect of us letting this data out? Will it damage our reputation, our financial position? Could we get in trouble with the stock market, with the stock exchange, sorry, if we release this kind of information? So you've got to be careful about those legal issues. And privacy, I think, is something that as individuals we're used to thinking about. You don't want your personal information released. So yeah, you don't, the truck driver's name you might take off. But privacy, it's more than just people's names. It's more than just people's data. If you think of privacy as the organization as well, if you don't want that data set to be associated with your company, then you probably want to think about not having your asset names there, because maybe some of your asset names are unique. You might want to consider exactly the depth of data, because data is basically the output of a process. So somebody could actually reverse engineer your process. So there are a number of different things around privacy, and they don't just revolve around the individual. Now, one of the ones that I found really interesting was accuracy. So the reason behind accuracy is apparently there's more than one person who actually is worried about sending data out in the open and it might not be accurate. Now, I would be worried about having data internally that's not accurate. I wouldn't be worried about the external bit at the moment, because if you've got data that's not accurate, your bigger problem is the fact that you're using it internally and you're making decisions. So, I think, again, it goes back to that internal, external. If you're not using data, if you can't use data internally and you don't have it accurate, then you probably got a lot of work to do internally before you start looking at external stuff. So we'll address a few of these issues and concerns. But why would you want to? What are the benefits? Gartner in 2015, they had a paper that basically highlighted a few benefits, and we'll go through some of them as well. So one of the things that GMG is quite good at is the encouraging industry standards and enhanced interoperability. So if you've got data out there and you're pushing your data out there, it's a rising tide lifts all boats. It's something that's going to help the whole industry, and that's good for everyone. We'll touch again on safety, but safety is something which we're all concerned about. There is no competitive advantage in safety from that aspect. Everybody deserves to go home. So anything that we can do to make our industry more safer is better for everyone. And then there's some other, there's more kind of corporate public relations kind of, we're giving out this data to the world. We're a good company. Everyone likes that kind of touchy-feely stuff. And then the whole research aspect of it and education. If you're stimulating research, then the whole industry benefits out of that, but it's your data, so you're going to benefit more. So if we look at some of those other aspects of it, let's address the why bother. Well, machine learning uses a lot of data, potentially. And a lot of organizations now are using machine learning in applications, which they don't really think of it as AI maybe. So if you're using autonomy, you might not classify that particularly as an AI project. It's an autonomous project. But obviously there's data that's involved in projects like that. In GIS projects now, everybody's adding AI enabled. It's a new buzzword. Let's stick some AI into our products. But where's that data coming from? So there's really only three options. It's either synthetic, the company's made it up, or it's yours. You've actually given it, or it's your competitors. So do you want to have your mine planning software that's been built by a vendor that has all your competitors' data in it, but none of yours? That's not really going to benefit you an awful lot. So there's actually a good reason now that we're as an industry beginning to use an awful lot more applications that have machine learning and AI in them. Then we really want to have those products strong, and we want to have our data in them in order to make it more relevant to ourselves. We talked earlier about education and research. So on the left is a flower, on the right's an engine. Now, I looked through the list. There's an awful lot of technical people here. So anyone that's done a course in machine learning will probably recognize that as an iris, and that is the hello world of the machine learning courses. If you do a machine learning course, you are going to know all about the iris dataset, and you're going to learn how to build models on the iris dataset. Now, this is what our engineers are learning. They're using the iris dataset, and they are learning machine learning on flowers. And they're coming into your organization, and they know how to predict the length of a flower petal because they've done that. Wouldn't you prefer them to have data about an engine? That's a lot cooler. Like how oil samples, data on oil samples, and they can detect what's a good oil sample, what's a bad oil sample. Sensor data, and they can detect whether or not that engine there is one that's going to fail in 3 days' time. What if they had data on blastability and throughput to a plant, and they can actually predict that the parameters in this blast is going to be better than the parameters in that blast because I've done it in data. If we give our students those tools, then we're going to get better students coming into our organization that we don't have to handhold from day one. They're actually going to be able to teach the rest of us how to do this. That's going to be a good thing. Researchers are desperate for good data sets in order to do research. Why don't we give it to them? Because if we give them our data sets, they're going to work for free on our data, and they're going to find something, And if it's not them, it's going to be somebody else. It's going to be somebody else, and it's going to come back to us, and we're going to get the benefit of that. And that's for very little cost, but we're getting the benefit. And so I think we have to look at those benefits and really push this, because it's something which we get the benefit in a few years' time, but the benefits are there. We talked about safety. Safety is a common concern. It's something which we're all concerned about, and if we can do anything to save a life, then we should. Recently, with obviously all the issues with tailing dams and the safety issues around it, there's been a push to getting more data around tailing dams, and there's a global tailings portal, which is collecting a lot of this information. And there's a paper last year entitled "Open Data Could Have Helped Us Learn from Another Mining Dam Disaster." It's something which, if we can, then we should. And by allowing that data to be released, then this is something that we can possibly do. The first thing that people think of, or maybe not the first, one of the first things is, I'm not going to give you my sales data. I'm not going to give you my production tons. So why should I? We're not going to do that. And so I think when you look at the data that can be shared, I think you've got to look at it in different levels. And again, this is one from Gartner, from the same study. And they looked at it in 3 different levels. So you could have raw and processed data, and that's just numbers. Yeah, and that's not going to give anything away about your organization, but it's probably not going to be too useful either, because there could be noise in there. There could be errors. It's possibly that it's not going to be very useful. But what we do internally as an organization, we take that raw unprocessed data and we'll then synthesize it. We'll transform it. So we might put it into degrees Celsius rather than whatever it was to begin with, and we'll actually make sense of that. But we'll not put any business value on it apart from it being useful information. And then the third stage is to actually analyze it. Make trends, start to get some business value out of it. So you can see there's a spectrum here. And I think when we're looking at data and data sets and publishing stuff, then we have to look at that spectrum, and we have to look at somewhere in the middle is the sweet spot. Because as soon as we get to that business side of it, then we start to get into the issues of pushback and of getting ourselves into trouble, quite frankly. But we don't want to give raw and processed data, because that's not going to be particularly useful. And I think to Michelle's point earlier on, that middle bit where it's synthesized and transformed, that's all about getting information which we know about, which we can document, which has been cleaned up to a certain extent, and which we can actually package up. And I think we have to be aware that there is this spectrum here. So we talked about the legal side of it, and why we might step away from this. So one of the things that legal do, and they do very well, is that whole risk assessment, because that's at topmost in their mind. What's the risk in doing this? And as we said, not all data sets are equal. So the UWA System Health Lab, so the University of Western Australia, just down the road from us, they've looked at this a few years ago, and they basically came up with a risk assessment tool, and it basically steps you through, and it's useful, but it's just covers the bases at the moment. But it would look at, do you have personal information here? Do you have financial information? And then it pops out essentially with a yes, it's good to go, or no, it's not. You should be careful about this one. And so I think giving your organization the tools to be able to make an assessment, I think, is something that's important, because really it's all about giving the people that you're trying to convince all the information that they need to be able to say, yep, I'm quite happy. It's got a rating of 2.2. That sounds low enough to me. Let's go for it. So these tools will be important, and it will help the decision-making process. one of the things that we touched on briefly earlier was okay, the technical side of it, like what is a good data set? So there's a number of different things that have to be considered, and they're listed there. You know, size of the data, the quality. Representative real world conditions is an interesting one in that who decides that they're representative. Obviously, if you are running a plant for 12 months and you only ever give data out that's in your cyclone months, then it's going to be a bit different from the good months. So you have to be careful about some of calendar-based issues. And that bottom one about the good metadata, I think that's important, that any data set has a well-defined list of metadata that people can look at and pick it up and say, well, I know what that means. I know what that is. And I think a guideline would be important in trying to define some of these terms and what we mean by some of these terms. So I want to give you an example again from UWA, in that they've gone through this for a very small field, just purely prognostic information. And so they've built up a website. You can browse the data sets that they have. So here I've highlighted they've got an oil analysis engine data set, which is quite handy because it actually comes from haul trucks. So we can go into that data set, and it's got some nice information about it. It tells you, what papers have been written about it. It gives you a bit of information of where it comes from, and it's got multiple tabs across the top, giving you some information. Now, this is the same type of information that's across all the data sets, and it gives you an idea if you're going to download this, what's the data I'm looking at. And I've downloaded this one and I've run it through a few models, and it's very easy because all the information is there that you need. And just to give you a quick example, if you click on that, that's exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get this, comma separated file. All these columns are explained in the metadata. Funnily enough, I actually recognize the format of this file as files that we have internally in our own organization. And what's interesting about this one is that the original file has got about 60 or 70 columns, but the one that's made public only has these ones here. And so somebody's already gone through that process and said, oh, actually, either these columns, maybe we don't need them, it's not going to help us, or maybe this is, there's too much information, we don't want to share this. So somebody's already gone through that collation period and had a look at it. And the other side of this that you might want to think about is oil samples. Okay, well, maybe the industry standard, let's just say, is 90% of the samples should be okay and 10% aren't. And yours are 50-50, let's just say you're having a bad month and it's 50-50 and you've got a lot of bad oil samples. There's nothing to say that you don't have to give out exactly the data that you're collecting. You can balance your data sets. If there's numbers that that might show a part of your process, there are ways around it, and I think again that those guidelines might help in addressing some of these concerns and giving a cookbook on how we can build something. So, what's the GMG doing about it? It's a big question, isn't it? There's three aspects that were identified as potentially being important, and I think these are the things which would love to discuss and get people's ideas about. So the first one is, well, what is the current state of mining data sets? Can we get a list of them? Can we publish them? And we started looking at that, but it may or may not come as a surprise to everyone, but there's not an awful lot out there. It's pretty difficult trying to find some good data sets that are readily available. So we've collected some of them together, and it's on a Google Sheet. So if anyone's got any suggestions, please, I'll send the link out. Please add to it. And then really the guidelines in building new data sets, which is what we've been talking about just now, that we're looking to run in parallel, because that will help kick off the third part, which is with these guidelines in tow, and basically try to go to mining companies and try to basically get data sets from mining companies, essentially, and to build up a repository for the industry that will essentially, benefit us all. So, thank you very much. The link there is for the project. Hopefully, everybody will get involved. And yeah, any questions, please?
Thank you, Rob. Well done. So, Heather T, have you? I think I did see some questions come through on the chat.
Yes, we've had a few questions and a few comments that I'll throw out to you, Rob, to help with. So the first one that came in is that what is preventing mining companies from sharing open data sets with researchers at the moment?
The lack of a good guideline. Honestly, I think it comes down to it comes down to why. I mean, why bother? Mining companies have got more important things to do than give data out, or do they? That's the thing that we need to convince everybody, that this is important for a long-term sustainability of the industry.
Okay, sorry, have you encountered a situation in which the OEMs do not share their data? How would we handle it? OEMs might not think sharing their data is a win-win situation.
So that's a very good question. So central to that, and it's a potentially separate subject to this, but who owns the data? And I've come across that myself in quite a few instances. As a mining company, as a representative of the mining companies, I believe that mining companies own the data. I don't believe the OEM owns the data, and I can see all the OEMs going, "Oh no!" My apologies. I understand from a vendor's point of view, because I have been on the vendor side in the mining space, so I understand from that point of view that there is certainly certain data that that's difficult to share, and that's understandable. But for example, if I'm collecting data about an engine that I own, why can't I get that data? Why isn't that my data? So it's a very good question. It's I think there'll be a long road there in deciding, who's the data belong to. But I think we're talking about open data. Everything's going open now, and my personal opinion is that the vendors that go open will be the ones that survive. If you look at Microsoft used to be one of the most closed organizations, and now you look at them, and they're thriving. So I believe openness in data is just the way forward.
Okay, and in the chat line, there have been a few comments that agreeing that the data belongs to the clients. There might be other opinions, I'm sure. Then there was a comment on about the raw data. Sometimes the raw data is what a data scientist wants to look at to build understanding, and that if we don't get raw data in the industry people will lack the data cleaning, wrangling, feature engineering, and exploratory data analysis. I don't know if you have any comments to add to raw data, getting just raw data and anything like that.
Yes, and that is actually very true. It is true. If the only downside to that is if you get raw data, then you need somebody to help you in interpreting that data, and I can see that being a problem from a company point of view. Is that if I'm giving out free data, I don't want to spend a lot of time walking people through it. It's a very good point in that because if you wanted to use some data and somebody else has done the cleaning and interpretation, then they might have interpreted something important out of the data set, and it's no longer available to you, and they might have done it wrong. So in an ideal world, yes, one of the problems is going to be that the raw data might be just too raw for companies to actually allow to go out, and maybe it's again on that spectrum. Maybe there's some data that can be going out raw, some data that has to be sanitized in some way. Yeah, and again, it's a point that's open for discussion. But at the end of the day, you've got to get a mining company to agree to let that data go. And so, in the first instance, that's got to be your first goal, is try to get the mindset first of all that open data is good, and then maybe open the openness a bit further down the track.
Following that, there was the comment on being prepared to share data that is not 100% correct, and the fear that might come with that.
So yeah, I think that's an important consideration to have. I'm not sure if by correct if that means accurate. I would be very wary about inaccurate data anyway, no matter what you're doing with it. If correctness means it's a perfect data set, then I think that's a different question. But if it's not a good enough data set to use, then either people won't use it, or people want to come back to you to ask more questions. So I think the more effort you put into making it a good data set will pay dividends in the future.
Okay, and some of the comments that are still coming through the chat line with regard to this are should we be looking with regard to the raw data, should we be looking at preparing narratives to accompany the raw or open data? Is it a question of accuracy or precision? I hope I'm understanding these comments correctly. And another, just following on that, it's hard for a company to release data until they have analyzed or interpreted it to see what the data is saying. It may not be complementary to the company, and they don't want to be unpleasantly surprised.
That's actually, yeah, that's very insightful actually. It's almost as if you need to use the data, solve the problem first before you can release the data for other people to solve your problem. Yeah, no, that's very true. Because that's just very true. There's not much more I could say to that. Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. Could you elaborate on the steps that should be taken to ensure data have a minimum standard for sharing in open access platforms? Who would be responsible to ensure data are correct? Is there a guideline to set the data quality standards?
Well, the guideline will be something which we can discuss later, because it's, again, that's a very good point. Is you want, if you put if you make it too prescriptive and say this is what you have to do, then companies are going to say, well, I'm not going to invest the time to do that. Companies are wanting to do as little as possible but still protect themselves, and so I think there's going to be a fine line that we have to traverse. There was a discussion that we had a few months ago or a few weeks ago at SME around this, and I think one of the suggestions, and it might have been Gren, I saw you was on the line, was that we pick something easy and we just say, look, this is what we should be looking at for this area. Maybe it's maintenance data. For maintenance data, this is what we're looking for, and go slowly, pick an easy topic first, and move on from there. But we've got to be careful that we don't make it so difficult for companies that they're just not going to do it.
All right. If the data coming from different sources is anonymized and pre-processed differently, how can we use the different data sets together? There should be a minimum of standardization and knowledge about the data we use. Or should there be a minimum of standardization and knowledge about the data we use?
In an ideal world, that would be great, yes. But I don't know if we're quite there yet. And this is not just a mining issue. You know, it's an issue in data science as a whole. Even anonymizing data, what we thought we could do with anonymizing data is actually it's been proven to be wrong. You know, you can still find out that data by linking it in some other ways. So it's a very careful thing that we have to do there. And I get the point, because there was a competition done, and it was drilling data, and we were just observers, and we're looking through it, and we're asking some questions of the students who are going through this competition, and there was no driller, there's no person's name there. Saying, well, one of the most important things to know is, like, well, who was sitting in the drill for those hours that it was drilling for that 12 hours? Because maybe John's better than Bob, and it's got nothing to do with the ground they're drilling in. It's just John's a better person than Bob at drilling. So you take that information out, then you are losing stuff. But even if you put in employee 42, then you're still giving some information away to people. So it's not truly anonymized. And so there's, again, it's a sliding scale between totally anonymizing something and getting the use out of it. And I don't know what the answer is, to be honest. I really don't know. But it's if we don't start somewhere, then I don't know how we'll solve the problem.
Cool, excellent. Well, thank you, Rob. That was excellent. Thank you, Heather, for fielding the questions.